Funding for this video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
With over 1,000 monsters to choose from in D&D, it can be hard to know which ones to use, and even harder to know how to play them. What weapons do they favor? What tactics would they use? How do they interact with other types of monsters? These are all questions that can come up to DMs that are looking to make their combats more enticing for their players. It's certainly one that I struggled with. That's why I'm back today with another monster breakdown for D&D. Hello again everyone, I'm Bill from Altroll, and today I'm going to dive into a brief history of a D&D creature, how that history was adapted into 5th edition, and how this lore can help game masters make their combat encounters better. So, whether you're here for the cool lore breakdown or for the combat tactics, I'm hoping to give you a lot more to chew on when it comes to the monsters we face in D&D. For episode 23, let's look at the awkward half-children of ogres and humanoids, the Half-Ogre. While the ogre dates back to the 12th century in mythology and folklore, the Half-Ogre doesn't get nearly as much recognition. In fact, while half-breeds of mythological creatures have existed since ancient times, the Half-Ogre specifically doesn't seem to have made a major impact. Madame d'Aulnoy was the first to use the word ogre to refer to the creature's offspring in her 1968 story, The Bee and the Orange Tree. As for ogres mixing with other races, that seems to be restricted to the lore of D&D when half-ogres were added to the game. Even pivoting over to D&D specifically, the history of the Half-Ogre is complicated at best. The first edition Fiend Folio, published in 1981, added the Ogrilon, a mixed-breed race that occurred when ogres mated with orcs. Ogrilon were unique, to say the least. Tribal creatures that mostly resembled orcs, only 10% of Ogrilons inherited ogre-like abilities. Faster and stronger than the average orc, Ogrilons had bone plates under their skin that acted as subdermal armor, and their fists hit as hard as a mace. These creatures were technically half-ogres, though that term was used in a more broad sense to include other ogre humanoid crossings. It wasn't until the 2nd edition's Monstrous Manual, released in 1993, that we see a dedicated stat entry for the Half-Ogre, which included the Half-Ogre and the Ogrilon. 2nd edition ogre parties would sometimes contain 1 or 2 shorter individuals that were significantly smarter than the other ogres. These were half-ogres. It was often speculated why ogres could breed with humans to create half-ogres, but not with elves or halflings. The answer: ogres have a rapidly adaptive biology, which allows them to breed with any humanoid race. These half-ogres are also able to breed with any other humanoids, though years of mixed breeding will eventually result in a horrible hybrid creature known as a mongrel man. The half-ogre's purpose in an ecosystem was essentially the same as a regular ogre's, to be a plague upon humans and demi-humans. Half-ogres often lived among other ogres, though some may choose to form their own tribes or take up with bands of orcs. 2nd edition also clarified that the Ogrilon, while still present as its own creature, was a fiercer species of half-ogre, specifically being the result of female orcs mating with male ogres. Ogrilon were larger, more violent, and resembled a large orc in terms of physicality. The Half-Ogre remained present when the 3rd edition Monster Manual released in 2000, but very little changed regarding their lore. When 4th edition released in 2008, however, the Half-Ogre was noticeably absent from the monster options. It wasn't until the 5th edition books released in 2014 that the Half-Ogre made a return to D&D. In 5th edition, the Half-Ogre, or Ogrilon, as in this edition they're the same creature, is described as the offspring of an ogre and either a human, hobgoblin, bugbear, or orc. Standing at 8 feet tall and weighing around 450 pounds on average, that's basically all we know about them. In the monster manual, the 2 sentences I read off are all that's really written about them, and the Half-Ogre's dedicated breakout page is just copy-pasted lore from the ogre. They band together in nomadic groups, they raid nearby farmlands and villages, and they only really listen to themselves or greater giants. If you want more detail than that, you can go listen to the ogre's in-depth lore in the video I made on them specifically. But for the sake of not repeating the same lore in 2 separate videos, I'm just going to go ahead and move on to their stat block. Now that we've examined their lore, at least as much as we can, let's pivot over to the Half-Ogre's stat block to take a look at how they work mechanically. Starting at the top, we have their size, creature type, and alignment. Size in 5th edition defines the space a creature takes up in combat, with a large creature taking up a 10-foot by 10-foot square or hex on the battle map. According to their lore block, an adult Half-Ogre stands at 8 feet tall and weighs around 450 pounds. Their creature type is Giant. Giants are human-like creatures that tower over regular humanoids, and include the various types of giant, as well as Ettins, Fomorians, ogres, and trolls. Alignment broadly describes a creature's general outlook on the world, and combines their moral beliefs with their attitudes towards society and order. Interestingly enough, the alignment of the Half-Ogre is any chaotic alignment. This means that Half-Ogres are arbitrary and act based on their own whims, but they're not going to be innately good, neutral, or evil, leaving those moral decisions up to the experiences of each individual Half-Ogre. Below that top bar are the rest of the Half-Ogre's stats, which are essential for the Dungeon Master to play them in combat. The Half-Ogre has an armor class of 12, 4d10 plus 8 hit points, or 30 on average, and a movement speed of 30 feet. Looking at their ability scores, they have 17 strength, 10 dexterity, 14 constitution, 7 intelligence, 9 wisdom, and 10 charisma. With 10 being average for an ability score, Half-Ogres have high strength and constitution, average dexterity and charisma, and low intelligence and wisdom. For their skills and proficiencies, the Half-Ogre has dark vision out to 60 feet, a passive perception of 9, speaks common and giant, has a proficiency bonus of +2, has a challenge rating of 1, and awards 200 experience points when killed. In terms of offensive actions, the Half-Ogre has a battle axe attack and a javelin attack. The battle axe has a +5 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, deals 2d8 plus 3 slashing damage when held in one hand, and deals 2d10 plus 3 slashing damage if held in 2 hands. The javelin attack has a +5 to hit, a melee reach of 5 feet, a thrown range of 30 feet normally and 120 feet at disadvantage, and deals 2d6 plus 3 piercing damage on a hit. Lastly, we have their environment tags. When using digital resources, we can see that Half-Ogres can be found in the Arctic, deserts, forests, hills, mountains, the Underdark, and urban areas. Now that we've gone through and sorted out their stat block, we can begin to relate the Half-Ogre's lore and abilities to how we should be using them in combat encounters. Specifically, we're going to look at how they behave, how they would approach a combat situation, and how to get into the mind of a Half-Ogre if you want to fight effectively as one. To do this, we're going to take the lore and stat block of the Half-Ogre and compare that with how that information is intended, referencing tactics and interpretations from The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Amon. Let's start by going through Amon's key assumptions one by one and relating them to the Half-Ogre as we go. The first of Amon's assumptions is that most creatures want to survive, and if seriously wounded, will try to flee combat. Exceptions to this rule are fanatics or intelligent beings who believe they'll be hunted down and killed if they do flee. Seriously wounded can be subjective, but we can assume that threshold to roughly be 1/3 of the creature's health. With an average of 30 hit points, 1/3 of that would be 10. While being slightly smarter than their ogre parents, the Half-Ogre's temper could keep them from running away. But generally, if a Half-Ogre is reduced to 10 hit points or fewer, it would begin to flee combat. Next up, let's look at how their alignment can impact their thinking. On the scale of good to evil, good creatures tend to be friendly to others, whereas evil creatures are hostile to others. On the scale of lawful to chaotic, lawful monsters may try to capture or non-lethally subdue others, whereas chaotic monsters would just kill them. Since Half-Ogres are listed as being of any chaotic alignment, we can only really generalize one aspect of their behavior. Namely, since they are chaotic, they're likely to kill their opponents in battle. However, a Half-Ogre can land anywhere on the good to evil scale, giving dungeon masters a good amount of flexibility in where and how the party encounters them. Continuing with their mindset, let's dive into some of their mental ability scores. Half-Ogres have an intelligence score of 7. With regards to intelligence scores of 7 or less, Amon states, a creature with intelligence of 7 or less operates purely from instinct. That doesn't mean it uses its features ineffectively, only that it has one preferred modus operandi and isn't going to be able to adjust if that stops working. While smarter than ogres by 2 whole points, that's not saying much considering the ogre only has an intelligence score of 5. While Half-Ogres may realize their strategy isn't working faster than an ogre would, they're still not going to be smart enough to try new tactics or engage their targets differently. Half-Ogres also have a wisdom score of 9. With regards to wisdom scores of 8 to 11, Amon states, a creature with wisdom of 8 to 11 knows when to flee, but is indiscriminate in choosing targets. In this aspect, Half-Ogres have the upper hand when compared to ogres. While an ogre's rage or stupidity may lead it to not realize it's about to die, the Half-Ogres have just enough mental capacity to know when they're losing, meaning they have a higher chance of running away in combat. That being said, they do also have the ogre's temper, so they may get too angry to run away anyways. Now that we've set up how they think, let's look at the Half-Ogre's physical abilities that influence how they fight. Thinking like Amon, we can assume the following. Creatures with high strength focus on melee combat, and won't need to compensate with greater numbers. As such, they won't need to outnumber an enemy to be willing to take the fight. Creatures with average dexterity, whatever their strength or constitution, will need to choose their battles carefully. Since their ability to avoid damage is poor, they'll want some other type of advantage. Creatures with high constitution typically have a hit point advantage over their enemies, and because of that, they're less likely to hide in combat since they can soak up a couple attacks before going down. To recap our earlier stat block examination, Half-Ogres have high strength, average dexterity, and high constitution. Comparing that examination to the assumptions we just put forward, we can safely presume that Half-Ogres are melee brawlers who use their battle axe to slash their enemies, throwing javelins when an enemy is unreachable in melee. The last major premise from Amon is that in D&D 5th edition, unless otherwise specified, any creature gets their full movement, 1 action, 1 bonus action, and 1 reaction, just like any player character does. Amon posits that any creature that exists within the game world will have evolved in accordance with this rule. and it will seek to obtain the best possible result from the action economy of the game. This means they will combine whatever movement, actions, bonus actions, and reactions are available to them for the best possible outcome. Much like the ogre, the half-ogre is a dumb brute that doesn't have any abilities that maximize its action economy, and they don't even have the ogre's 40 feet movement speed to chase down fleeing foes. However, we can still maximize how they use their equipment to make them more effective in combat. They start with a battle axe and a javelin, which can each be held in one hand at the start of combat. At the start of their turn, they can run towards their target, loosing their javelin with their action, and then having an open hand to two-hand their battle axe. Once that first turn is done, they'll continue closing into melee with the closest available target, slashing with their two-handed battle axe to maximize their damage. So, with all of these assumptions laid out and applied to half-ogres, what do we now know about how to use them in combat? First, half-ogres are the mixed offspring of an ogre and another humanoid race, that strike a middle ground between the intelligence of humanoid races and the sheer strength of ogres. This in-between nature means they aren't as strong as an ogre would be, but they're also not smart enough to employ advanced tactics or strategies. Second, half-ogres will always be chaotic, but can fluctuate between good, neutral, and evil depending on how the DM wants to use them. While this means they can still fill the evil role as a monster to fight, half-ogres can also present roleplay opportunities if they lean more neutral or good, giving DMs a wide range of ways to use the half-ogre in their game. Third, in combat, half-ogres will open with a javelin attack before rushing towards the closest enemy with their battle axe. Due to their diminished intelligence, half-ogres are still melee brutes that are going to try to slug it out, but they are smart enough to know when they're losing a fight and when they should probably run away. Fourth, if reduced to 10 hit points or fewer, a half-ogre will attempt to flee combat. Their movement speed of 30 feet means they'll likely have to dash to get away from a fight, leaving them open to attacks of opportunity while they retreat. Fifth, if a half-ogre wins a combat encounter, their chaotic nature means they'll likely kill their defeated foes. Much like ogres, half-ogres are equally gluttonous, and may turn a defeated adventurer's bones into a beautiful necklace before that creature is done rolling death saving throws. With that, we come to the end of today's video on the half-ogre. A slightly weaker version of the ogre, the half-ogre is unfortunately rather plain when it comes to the monster variety of D&D. Ogres were already a simple monster, and while that simplicity works well for them, the half-ogre just feels like a tacked-on minion for parties to fight as a warm-up before the real boss fight with an ogre. I just wish Wizards of the Coast would give them some unique lore and or some unique abilities that give Dungeon Masters more ways to use them. As they are now, they work well as warm-up minions, and maybe that's all they need to be. However, what I want to know is, what do you think of the half-ogre? Do you agree that they're a bit basic and boring as an independent monster, or do you think half-ogres play an important role as a warm-up minion for larger ogre boss battles? You can let me know down in the comments, or you can discuss it on the Alt-Roll Discord using the link in the description. If you want to support Alt-Roll, you can visit our Ko-fi link in the description to leave a one-time or recurring donation. And make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when our videos go live. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.